North Korean workers then remotely connected to these US-based devices to carry out their tasks and fulfill job duties. Media reports revealed that at least 300 US companies were victimized and even 2 government agencies were infiltrated. The severity of the situation forced authorities to launch a sweeping crackdown. The Department of Justice froze 29 financial accounts across 16 states, shut down 21 fraudulent websites, and seized 200 computers suspected of being used in similar operations. Welcome back to Oh My God. Today we're diving into a chilling story. Imagine enemy agents landing jobs through remote interviews, collecting hefty salaries from our tech companies, and funneling that money back home to bankroll their own weapons program. This scenario is very real. It's known as Jasper Sleep. According to a report by the think tank CSIS, this cross-border job scheme brings the North Korean government at least $600 million in revenue every year. In late June, the Department of Justice issued a press release announcing that 6 Chinese nationals were charged with assisting North Korean-linked IT workers in securing remote jobs. They obtained positions at more than 100 US companies. The DOJ stated these jobs have already generated at least $5 million for North Korea, money that was then funneled into its weapon development program. The Department of Justice made it clear this was a deliberate operation by the North Korean government. They dispatched skilled tech workers worldwide that used stolen American identities to secure remote IT jobs, generating revenue for North Korea's weapons of mass destructions program. Beyond that, these operatives also steal sensitive information or transfer valuable technology and assets back home.
If you own a company or work in recruitment,
I was working remotely most of the time.
you might have interviewed a North Korean operative and not even know it.
Hi.
I can start immediately.
Hundreds of them have been using fake identities to seek remote IT jobs at American companies in a state-sponsored effort to make money for the North Korean regime and fund its military program.
For example, one North Korean worker at a blockchain company siphoned off cryptocurrency worth over $900 at the time. How does Jasper Sleep actually work? These IT workers create fake accounts and set up personal profiles on LinkedIn and GitHub, then submit job applications to various companies. During interviews, they use VPNs to mask their IP addresses and software to alter their voices. These details make the applicants appear far more convincing, increasing their chances of gaining the trust of employers. If the position is successfully secured, that's when the collaborators inside the United States come into play. These operatives, such as the 6 Chinese nationals indicted along with their accomplices, provide addresses, bank accounts, and fake US identity documents. They also set up shell companies and fraudulent websites to promote the credentials of the remote IT workers. In October 2024, law enforcement moved in, conducting searches at 7 locations across California, New York, and New Jersey. Inside these registered offices, they discovered a large number of laptops, so-called laptop farms. Since some companies provide laptops to employees, local collaborators in the US supplied the space to set them up. North Korean workers then remotely connected to these US-based devices to carry out their tasks and fulfill job duties. Media reports revealed that at least 300 US companies were victimized and even 2 government agencies were infiltrated. The severity of the situation forced authorities to launch a sweeping crackdown. The Department of Justice froze 29 financial accounts across 16 states, shut down 21 fraudulent websites, and seized 200 computers suspected of being used in similar operations. In fact, it's far from the first time that Chinese and North Korean hacker groups have exploited loopholes in the US to commit fraud and reap illicit gains. Beyond carrying out cyber attacks independently, the 2 sides also share resources and provide each other with what they need. China's cyber attacks against the United States are well known, including the highly active Volt Typhoon campaign. This operation has targeted critical US infrastructure, such as water systems, power grids, ports, and airports, with the intent of developing the capability to cripple them in a short time. Another notorious campaign, Salt Typhoon, attempted to infiltrate major American telecom and internet providers, stealing user data, intercepting sensitive communication, and enabling surveillance. In fact, as recently as July, the Department of Homeland Security discovered that a state's National Guard had been compromised by a Salt Typhoon for nearly a year. And at the end of last year, the US Treasury reported that hackers backed by the Chinese government may have breached networks and stolen a number of unclassified documents. In July of this year, Microsoft revealed that 2 Chinese state-sponsored hacker groups, Lightning Typhoon and Violet Typhoon, had exploited a security vulnerability in SharePoint, Microsoft collaboration and document management platform. Reports indicate that hackers used this flaw to attack several state government agencies, federal departments, as well as universities and energy companies. In addition, the think tank CSIS released a report in July noting the close cooperation between China and North Korea in cyber operation. The report explained that because North Korea's domestic internet infrastructure is relatively limited, it often conducts attacks through Chinese and Russian networks, masking their origins and making attribution far more difficult. China provides North Korea with various infrastructure, with several cities in northeastern China, such as Shenyang, already identified as key hubs for North Korean hackers operating abroad. A decade ago, they even used China-based IP addresses to launch major cyber attacks against South Korea's infrastructure, attempting to cripple water facilities, nuclear power plants, and more. Early last year, the Department of Justice formally announced charges against a North Korean national named Rim Jong-hyuk. He was involved with a hacker group named Andariel, which used ransomware to attack the US healthcare system, attempted to hijack hospitals and insurance providers. The revenue from these cyber attacks was then funneled back into North Korea's defense and technology development, or used to fund further hacking operations. Prosecutors noted that these North Korean state-directed hacker groups laundered ransomware proceeds through intermediaries based in China, then used the funds to acquire new cyber equipment to carry out further intrusions and steal critical defense and technology intelligence. Subsequent victims of these attacks included 2 US Air Force bases and the Office of Inspector General at NASA. These organized, highly coordinated, and technically advanced cyber attacks demonstrate that they're being carried out with clear intent and planning. The increasing frequency of these operations makes their purpose unmistakable: to extract as much money, classified intelligence, and technology from the United States as possible, weakening America's economic strengths while narrowing the gap between the two sides. The backing of their governments makes this all the more evident. China and North Korea's cyber attacks are growing ever more frequent, so how should we respond? First, we must clearly recognize that their hostility toward the United States is real. No matter how polite or cordial Chinese leaders and officials may appear, or how much goodwill they claim to show, they will never pass up an opportunity to undermine America in pursuit of China's own interests. This is evident from their deployment of spies across the US and their tolerance of companies exporting fentanyl precursors to America. The CSIS report makes clear that one of the greatest challenges in combating transnational cybercrime is the lack of effective international cooperation. Even when the United States imposes direct or indirect sanctions on Chinese and Russian entities involved in North Korea's cyber operations, the impact remains limited because they can easily find alternative channels in other countries to bypass US restrictions. What we need is a multilateral framework to address accountability across third-party states. Furthermore, we need stricter enforcement of financial and currency regulations. The North Korean regime exploits weak KYC and MAL practices across countries using informal platforms to bypass oversight, launder illicit funds, and evade sanctions. To counter the threat, nations must rigorously implement KYC and MAL standards to strengthen oversight of emerging digital assets. In 2024, the United Nations adopted the Convention on Cybercrime, strengthening international cooperation to combat crimes committed through ICT systems, aimed at enhancing global collaboration against cybercrime. The convention defines various types of cyber offenses and imposes obligations on member states to collect and preserve electronic evidence. Signatories must ensure that designated data within their jurisdiction is retained and allow authorities lawful access under domestic law. Countries are also obliged to respond to requests from other states for investigative cooperation, evidence preservation, and information exchange. Yet, even though Beijing has voiced support for this convention, what we see in reality is a lack of genuine effort to curb North Korea's increasingly frequent and brazen cyber crimes. On the contrary, China collaborates with North Korea hacker groups by providing infrastructure and money laundering channels that only strengthen them. Worse still, Chinese state-sponsored hacking groups themselves continue to attack US businesses and government agencies. Therefore, we must enforce the regulatory measures mentioned above, strengthen international cooperation, and most importantly, expose China's fingerprints in these cybercrimes. The Chinese government must be held directly accountable, and its false facade must be turned away. China and North Korea have never abandoned their confrontation with the United States. They steal from America's prosperity to strengthen themselves. Only by recognizing their hostility can we rightfully reinforce countermeasures, expand international cooperation frameworks, defend ourselves, and bring to justice those infiltrators who saw chaos within our borders and across cyberspace. Will the world act in time to stop China and North Korea's cyber aggression before it causes irreversible damage? Tell us in the comments! If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye!